Hi, my name is Lee Davis, one of the pastors here at Berlin Church in Lewis Center.
And I'm Rick Negley, and we thank you for joining us today.
We're going to speak a bit today on Thursday in response to Pastor Rick's teaching from Sunday from John chapter 21, and in particular today, how God might be glorified in a person actually giving their life up for the sake of Christ, for the sake of the gospel. This may sound a bit odd to our modern ears, but experts say that there were more martyrs for the cause of Christ in the 20th century than the previous 19 combined. We tend to lead relatively safe lives here in the West as we practice our faith in Christ. But the truth of the matter is, brothers and sisters all around the world don't have this same freedom. So it's an important question for us to take up as we think as global Christians. We're also going to comment on how God may be glorified in a long life, which probably most of us will lead as we don't find quite the same dangers that brothers and sisters have historically and even now around the world. So, Rick, how might Christ be glorified, especially in the life of one who's willing to lay their lives down quite literally for him?
Well, I think of what the Apostle Paul wrote in Philippians 1:20, where he said, "It's my eager expectation and hope that Christ will be glorified in my body, whether by life or by death." And it's easy to think about how we can glorify God in our life, but it's more challenging to think about how do I glorify God in death. Now, as pastors, we're often called to be with families at the time of death, maybe have seen a number of people pass from this life to the next life. And in some cases, that has been a beautiful and glorious thing where people were trusting in Jesus. And there have been cases where I've been present where it's been a horrific thing, where it was just excruciating and painful and even demonic. And so there are different ways to die, but there is a way to die to the glory of God as we're trusting in Him. And especially in the case of martyrdom, where someone dies for the cause of Christ, it shows that Jesus is the greatest treasure, that He is worthy of giving our very life for Him. And so there are all sorts of missionary biographies that I would encourage you to read. But one that comes to mind is of a missionary who traveled to a remote village, and he was poor and he didn't have shoes, and his feet became blistered, and the people of the village didn't want to hear his message, and they stoned him and beat him and left him for dead. And then they came back the next day and saw that he was still alive miraculously, and they saw the bruises and the sores on his feet, and they thought, who would be willing to suffer in such a great way to tell a certain message? That message must be worth hearing. And if someone is not only willing to suffer, but even to die, then it shows that the message is such good news and glorious news that it is worth hearing and believing.
The reason we come at this discussion the way we do today is because in John chapter 21, Jesus tells Peter that he is going to be a martyr. He is going to be crucified just like his Lord. But John, as we know from also in church history, is not martyred, though he is imprisoned on the island of Patmos. He gives his life for Jesus, certainly. He wasn't martyred like his companions, the other disciples. And so the question does arise, how can we glorify God in martyrdom, like Peter? And then how can we glorify God in a long life, like the Apostle John? So I want to take that up for just a moment. How can we glorify Christ if He allows us to live to old age? One of the things I love most about our church is that it is multi-generational. We have young families with lots of little kids, and then we have older families who've raised kids and have kids or grandkids or even great-grandkids. I love to be here to worship on a Sunday morning. I miss that right now where we can't all be together. But one of the most beautiful features of our church is that we have older saints who've walked with Christ for a long, long time. In Proverbs chapter 16, verse 31, we are reminded that gray hair is a crown of life. It's gained through a righteous life. And so there is really nothing more beautiful than seeing an older couple who has walked with Christ for a long time, who has found Him to be their greatest treasure. And though they may not get up in the pulpit on the stage and preach a sermon, though they may not lead a small group and teach from the Bible on a weekly basis, there is something about their lives that is very sermonic. They, for decades, have demonstrated to their children, to their grandchildren, to their friends, to our church family, that Jesus is better than anything else. And there is really nothing that is more beautiful than finding a gentle, quiet soul who speaks to the goodness of Jesus and has found him to be satisfying for all of their lives. So whether we lay our lives down for the sake of the gospel, as we've already said, brothers and sisters are doing that today all around the world because of the danger of believing the gospel and making Jesus known. Or we live our lives for Christ and live to an old age. We can glorify him in this life, whether by death or by life. Rick, any final thoughts today?
I'm reminded of 1 Corinthians 10:31 that says, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God." And I know that there are some older people who've lived a long life who don't feel like they can do very much. But some of those dear saints focus their time on praying, interceding for brothers and sisters in Christ. And some write letters and notes of encouragement and blessing. Some use their time to knit or crochet beautiful handiwork that is given as gifts to others. So there are all sorts of ways to glorify God in a long life, and I'm grateful for those who are doing it.
Thank you so much for joining us today. To our Berlin family, to our guests, we love you.